She was told she was overreacting, worrying over nothing. But when danger finally arrived, her instincts proved to be the only thing standing between her family and disaster. Helen Foster had never considered herself dramatic. If anything, she prided herself on level-headedness, the kind of woman who kept her head when everyone else was losing theirs. So when she first noticed strange things happening at her daughter's house, she brushed off her unease. The kitchen window left ajar, muddy footprints in the hallway, her granddaughter's favorite teddy bear found out in the rain. Small things, easily explained away. Still, Helen's instincts prickled. It started on a Sunday afternoon in early fall. Helen had come to help her daughter, Angela, prepare for Emma's birthday party. The house was buzzing with children's laughter, cake batter in the air, balloons bobbing from chair backs. Amid the joyful chaos, Helen noticed a flicker of movement outside the kitchen window, a dark shape disappearing behind the shed. She set down her mixing bowl and peered out, but saw nothing except the old lilac bush shivering in the breeze. She mentioned it to Angela as they arranged cupcakes on a tray. "Did you see someone in the yard just now?" Helen asked quietly. Angela laughed it off, brushing flour from her hands. "Probably just the neighbor's cat, Mom. Or maybe you saw your own shadow." Helen didn't argue, but the feeling lingered. That evening, as the guests were leaving, Helen walked out to her car and noticed a cigarette butt smoldering near the back fence. Neither Angela nor her husband, Mike, smoked. Helen picked it up gingerly, wrapping it in a tissue before tossing it in the trash. That night, Helen called her friend Ruth to talk things over. "I can't put my finger on it, but something's off at Angela's place," she confided. Ruth listened patiently, then told her not to worry. "You've always been a worrier, Helen. Let the young folks live their lives." Helen tried to set aside her anxiety, but new incidents piled up. Angela mentioned once that the spare key was missing from under the flower pot, but then shrugged it off. Probably the kids took it while playing. A week later, Helen spotted a man's footprint in the freshly planted garden bed, far larger than Mike's or any child's. When she brought it up at dinner, Mike chuckled. "Mom, you've been watching too many detective shows. It's probably the mailman or a meter reader." The dismissal stung. Helen hated being brushed aside, but every time she tried to voice her concerns, her family laughed her off. Angela teased, "Mom, you're overreacting. This is the safest street in town." Even Ruth seemed unconcerned, insisting that Helen relax and let things be. But Helen's unease grew. She began double-checking locks, drawing curtains tightly after dark, keeping her phone charged beside her bed. She urged Angela to do the same, but her daughter only rolled her eyes. "You worry too much, Mom. I'm not going to start living like a hermit." The tension simmered beneath their conversations. Helen grew more vigilant each time she visited, subtly inspecting doors and windows, checking the garage for signs of tampering. One Saturday, while watching the kids in the backyard, she found a crumpled note stuffed behind the garden bench. The handwriting was jagged and unfamiliar, the message short and chilling, "Nice house. Easy to get in." Helen's hands shook as she brought the note to Angela, but her daughter waved it off, insisting it was a prank by neighborhood teenagers. "Don't start making a fuss," Angela said. "You're scaring the kids." That night, Helen sat in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling helpless and angry. She couldn't force Angela to listen, couldn't make her see what she saw. But she made herself a promise. She wouldn't stop watching, wouldn't stop caring. Someone had to pay attention. Someone had to protect her family, even if they accused her of overreacting. She began keeping a notebook, quietly jotting down every odd occurrence. She told herself it was just to reassure her own mind. But deep down, Helen feared something was coming, something only she seemed willing to notice. Helen's notebook quickly filled with observations. She noted the time she heard odd noises near the garage, the lights flickering late at night in rooms she thought were empty, and even the day she found a pair of unfamiliar gloves wedged behind the trash cans. Each detail seemed small in isolation, but Helen felt the threads weaving together into something unsettling. She tried again to get Angela to take things seriously. On a blustery Wednesday evening, Helen arrived with homemade stew for dinner. Angela bustled around the kitchen, Emma scribbled with crayons at the table, and Mike scrolled through his phone. Helen broached the subject as casually as she could. "Did you notice the garage door didn't close properly last night?" Mike didn't look up. "I fixed it this morning, Mom." Probably just a sensor glitch. And the gloves by the trash cans? Helen pressed gently. Angela's patience frayed. Mom, please. I appreciate that you care, but you're making us all anxious. Maybe you should stop watching those crime shows for a while. Helen forced a smile and changed the subject, but she felt dismissed, her worries swirling heavier than the autumn leaves outside. She slipped out to the porch after dinner, phone in hand, scanning the yard as dusk settled. From the corner of her eye, she saw a dark car parked farther down the street than usual, engine idling. She squinted, trying to make out the driver, but the car sped off as a neighbor's dog barked nearby. That night, Helen couldn't sleep. She called Ruth for comfort, but even her friend sounded impatient. Helen, you need a hobby. Take up painting. Leave the sleuthing to the police. The following day brought fresh anxiety. Angela texted to say someone had rung their doorbell in the middle of the night, then run off before they answered. Probably kids, she wrote, adding a shrug emoji. Helen's gut twisted. She called the non-emergency police line to ask if there had been any suspicious activity reported in the area, but the officer was vague, nothing official, just a few complaints about prowlers and missing packages. Just keep your doors locked, ma'am, the officer advised. It's probably nothing. Helen kept watching. She lingered in her car at the end of her visits, noting the unfamiliar faces walking by, the battered van parked too long across the street. When she found Emma's bike knocked over, chain broken, she fixed it quietly and added another entry to her notebook. The strain wore on Helen. She snapped at Ruth during their usual coffee date, frustration leaking out in every word. No one is listening. What if I'm right and something happens? Ruth, softening, reached across the table. You love them. Maybe you're seeing what no one else can because you're the only one looking. But Helen, you have to take care of yourself, too. Later that week, Helen decided to take action. She installed a security camera above Angela's back porch, just for peace of mind, she explained, brushing off Angela's protests about privacy and cost. Mike rolled his eyes but said nothing. Helen set up alerts on her phone, watching the camera's feed late into the night, heart pounding every time the motion sensor triggered on a passing raccoon or the wind rattled the garbage cans. And then, finally, Helen saw something she couldn't explain away, a shadowy figure creeping along the back fence just after midnight, pausing by the window, peering in. Helen's blood ran cold. She captured the footage, heart racing, and tried to call Angela, who didn't answer. Helen sat up all night, staring at the screen, fear mixing with grim satisfaction. She wasn't imagining things. She wasn't overreacting. Someone really was watching her family. Helen rose before sunrise, her mind spinning with the images she'd captured. The figure in the video wore a dark hoodie, moving with practiced stealth along the fence line, pausing at the window as if memorizing the house's layout. Helen replayed the footage, memorizing every detail, then copied it to a USB stick. With trembling hands, she packed it in her purse along with her growing notebook of observations. Angela was making pancakes when Helen arrived. The children chattered, Mike scanned his emails, and the air was thick with maple syrup and weekend comfort. Helen waited until the kids were occupied, then drew Angela aside into the laundry room, closing the door. I need you to see something, Helen said, voice firm. She played the video on her phone, watching Angela's face go pale, her jaw tightening with each passing second. Who is that? Angela whispered. That's what I've been trying to tell you. Someone is watching the house. I'm not making this up, Angela. You need to take this seriously. Angela's hands shook. Should we call the police? We should, Helen replied, relief mingling with her lingering anxiety. And you need to show them this video. Mike was skeptical until he saw the footage. Maybe it's just a kid, he said, but even his voice wavered. Still, I'll put the security system on tonight. And maybe it's time we stopped hiding the spare key under the mat. Angela filed a police report that afternoon, showing them the footage and describing the incidents Helen had tracked. The officer took her seriously this time, promising extra patrols through the neighborhood and advising them to keep doors and windows locked. Helen handed over her notebook, her meticulous records earning a grateful nod. That night, Angela double-checked the locks, shutting every window tight. Helen stayed over, sleeping in the guest room with her phone close at hand. The family's unease was palpable. Even the children noticed the tense hush, asking why Grandma was so worried. The next morning, Angela apologized. "I should have listened sooner. I didn't want to believe something like this could happen here. I'm sorry, Mom." Helen hugged her daughter, feeling a weight lift. "What matters is you're listening now. We'll get through this." For the next few days, Helen juggled vigilance and normalcy. She baked cookies with Emma, helped Mike hang motion lights, and met with the responding officer, who revealed that a string of break-ins had been reported nearby. The police distributed flyers urging residents to remain alert. Word spread through the neighborhood. At the next block meeting, Helen was invited to share her experience. Some neighbors rolled their eyes, still convinced she was being paranoid, but others thanked her for sounding the alarm. Mrs. Patel from across the street admitted she'd seen a strange van parked near her house and would now report it. Helen kept her routines, but her vigilance never faltered. Each sound in the night set her on edge, but now she wasn't alone in her concern. Angela and Mike took precautions, neighbors paid more attention, and Helen found comfort in knowing her efforts were finally respected. One evening, as she helped Emma with her homework, Helen looked out the window at the street below, now brighter, safer, and full of watchful eyes. She knew she hadn't been overreacting, not this time. But she also sensed the story was not yet over. There were still questions, still danger lurking at the edges. Helen steeled herself for whatever might come next, determined to keep her family safe, no matter what anyone thought. The police patrols brought a brief sense of relief. Helen noticed officers driving slowly past Angela Street, occasionally stopping to chat with neighbors. Still, she felt tension tightening across the neighborhood. Conversations grew more cautious, porch lights burned brighter, and children weren't allowed outside alone. Angela tried to keep life normal for the kids, but anxiety seeped into every routine. Emma began having nightmares. Toby asked if someone was coming to take his toys. Mike grew irritable, double-checking doors before bed, snapping at minor inconveniences. The cheerful house that once echoed with laughter now felt shadowed by uncertainty. One night, the family awoke to the blaring of the alarm system. Helen rushed from the guest room as Angela herded the children into the bathroom, locking the door behind them. Mike ran to the living room and found the back door wide open, the security screen bent inward. The police arrived within minutes, searching the property with flashlights, their radios crackling in the dark. Nothing was missing, but muddy footprints tracked across the kitchen floor. One officer knelt, shining his light on a small tool, an old screwdriver left behind by the intruder. Helen's hands trembled as she picked up her notebook, carefully writing down every detail. The police took the incident seriously. "He's getting bolder," one officer warned. "You did the right thing calling us. Stay alert, and don't hesitate to dial 911 for anything suspicious." Angela, shaken, hugged Helen tightly. "I'm so scared, Mom. What if you hadn't made us put in the alarm?" Helen held her daughter close. "You're safe because you listened. We just need to stay careful." The next morning, neighbors gathered on the sidewalk, whispering about the break-in. Mr. Patel admitted he'd seen the same dark van circling the block after midnight. Helen made a list of license plate numbers from unusual vehicles parked nearby and handed them to the police. Mrs. Walters, who'd once dismissed Helen's worries, now asked her for advice on cameras and locks. Inside, Helen comforted Emma and Toby, inventing stories about brave grandmothers and clever children who always outsmarted the bad guys. She baked extra cookies, teaching the kids to find comfort in small routines. Angela decided to work from home, grateful for Helen's steady presence. The family installed new locks, reinforced the windows, and adopted the neighbor's old dog, a burly mutt named Diesel, whose bark rattled the windows. Each evening, Helen walked the perimeter of the yard with Diesel, flashlight in hand, scanning every shadow. The community rallied, neighbors formed a phone tree for emergencies, and a local handyman volunteered to help install motion sensors. But the tension never fully eased. Every creak in the night set Helen's heart pounding, every unfamiliar face outside brought a rush of anxiety. She kept her notebook by her side, documenting every odd occurrence, just in case. Then, late one stormy night, Helen's phone buzzed with a security alert. The backyard camera picked up movement, someone in a raincoat, crouched near the back fence, trying to pry open the garden shed. Helen didn't hesitate. She called 911 and, against every instinct, hurried downstairs to wake Mike. They watched from the window as the police arrived, flashlights slicing through the rain. The figure ran but was tackled in the neighbor's yard and handcuffed beside a squad car's flashing lights. The officers found a backpack stuffed with stolen mail, tools, and a list of addresses, including Angela's. That night, as the family huddled together, safe but shaken, Helen's fears were finally, undeniably justified. Angela, exhausted and grateful, looked at her mother with new respect. "You were right, Mom. I'm sorry for not listening sooner." Helen squeezed her daughter's hand, tears brimming. "I'd rather overreact than be too late. That's what mothers do." The news spread quickly through the neighborhood. The prowler who'd haunted their quiet street was finally in custody. The local police confirmed that he was connected to a string of burglaries in nearby towns. Angela's family was lucky to have gotten away with nothing but shaken nerves. The community's mood shifted from fear to relief, but the scars from weeks of tension lingered. Angela spent the next day on the phone, updating relatives and friends. She fielded calls from neighbors who now sought her advice on home security. Mike, who had been skeptical from the start, left Helen a note on the kitchen counter. "Thank you for keeping us safe. I was wrong. We're lucky to have you here." Helen tried to return to her old routines, but her sense of vigilance didn't easily fade. She accompanied Emma and Toby on their walk to school, waving at other parents and glancing over her shoulder at every parked car. Diesel, the adopted dog, became a constant companion, sticking close to her side. The children loved their new protector, and Diesel's presence brought a sense of safety that had been missing for so long. Angela, still on edge, threw herself into making the house even more secure. She coordinated with neighbors to organize a watch group, distributing Helen's lists and security tips. At the first meeting, Helen found herself at the center of attention. Neighbors who had dismissed her warnings now listened closely as she described what to look for, how to report suspicious behavior, and the importance of trusting your instincts. That weekend, the family gathered for a quiet dinner, grateful for normalcy. Mike grilled steaks on the back porch, Angela set the table with fresh flowers, and Emma and Toby chased Diesel around the yard. Helen watched them, her heart swelling with relief, and with pride that she'd protected them when no one else would. After dinner, Angela sat with Helen by the fire. "I wish I'd listened sooner," she admitted, her voice thick with regret. "You saw what we couldn't. You always do." Helen smiled softly. "You don't have to apologize. You wanted to believe everything was fine. But sometimes it's the ones who worry that keep everyone safe." Angela nodded, eyes glistening. "We couldn't have gotten through this without you, Mom. I don't know how to thank you." Helen squeezed her daughter's hand. "You don't have to. Just promise you'll trust your instincts, and maybe mine, a little more." As the weeks passed, the house returned to its old rhythms, but something fundamental had changed. Helen's voice was now sought and respected, her presence a comfort instead of a nuisance. The neighborhood grew closer, families supporting each other, exchanging phone numbers and looking out for unfamiliar faces. Emma drew a picture for Helen, her, Diesel, and the family, standing together with the words, "My grandma saves the day." That night, Helen wrote in her notebook one last time. "They called me a worrier. Now they call me wise. Sometimes, it takes a storm for others to see you've been the shelter all along." Spring edged into the neighborhood, bringing warmer evenings and the first hints of new leaves on the trees. With the prowler behind bars and the panic fading, the community seemed to breathe easier. Porch lights still shone at dusk, but now there was laughter at block parties, shared meals on patios, and a spirit of solidarity that Helen had never seen before. Angela took a new approach to daily life. She walked Emma and Toby to school when she could, lingering for a moment to wave at the crossing guard and trade news with other parents. She stopped treating Helen's concerns as a nuisance. Instead, she checked in every day, asking Helen's opinion on everything from fence repairs to the safest routes home at night. Helen found herself invited to neighborhood meetings, where her advice was sought and her instincts trusted. She spoke to a group of parents at the community center, sharing her story. "Don't be afraid to speak up," she told them. "Even if you feel like the only one worrying, you might be the only one seeing what matters." Mike, once so dismissive, became Helen's unexpected ally. He invited her to join him on weekend projects, installing new locks, painting the shed, even building a raised garden bed for Emma's strawberries. During breaks, Mike would apologize again, sometimes awkwardly, but Helen always waved it off with a smile. Their relationship, once polite but distant, grew warmer with each shared task. At home, Helen's bond with Emma and Toby deepened. They invented games with Diesel, planted flower seeds along the fence, and listened raptly as Helen told stories of her own childhood. On rainy days, Helen taught Emma to bake bread and Toby to play cards. Their laughter filled the house that had once felt haunted by worry. One afternoon, Helen found Angela on the porch, gazing at the yard with a thoughtful expression. "You know, Mom," Angela said, "I was afraid that all your worrying would just make us more anxious. But you taught us to pay attention, to care for each other, and that's what made us safer." Helen hugged her daughter. Caring isn't always comfortable, but it's always necessary. As weeks passed, Helen's reputation as the wise grandma spread beyond their street. The local paper interviewed her for a feature about neighborhood safety. Helen posed for a photo with Diesel, Emma, and Toby, her little team of lookouts, as she called them. That evening, the family celebrated with a picnic dinner in the backyard. Fireflies winked between the bushes, and Diesel dozed at Helen's feet. Angela lifted her glass, her eyes shining. "To the bravest woman I know, and the reason we're all here together." Helen smiled, warmed by more than just the gentle spring breeze. She finally felt seen, not just as a worrier, but as the watchful heart of her family. That night, as she prepared for bed, Helen wrote one last line in her notebook. "When the truth comes out, love grows stronger. Sometimes, it just takes a storm to clear the sky." As the weeks unfolded, the neighborhood's transformation became even more obvious. Families who once kept to themselves now gathered for weekend potlucks and evening walks. Helen became a fixture at these gatherings, her gentle humor and sharp observations making her a sought-after friend and confidant. Angela, too, changed. She volunteered to organize a spring block party, asking Helen to help plan games for the children. Emma and Toby, delighted by all the attention, ran from yard to yard with their friends, always returning to Helen's side for a snack or a story. Diesel, now the unofficial neighborhood watchdog, followed close behind. Helen's circle of friends grew. Mrs. Walters, once dismissive, invited her to join a local book club. Ruth, her old confidant, apologized for doubting her and became her regular walking partner again. Helen took pride in these new connections, feeling as if she'd rediscovered not only her voice but her community. One Saturday afternoon, Helen found herself surrounded by laughter and the smell of grilled burgers at the block party. She noticed Emma tugging at her sleeve, eyes shining. "Grandma, tell us the story about the time you chased the raccoon off the porch." A group of children gathered, listening with wide eyes as Helen spun the tale, making them giggle and gasp in turn. Mike joined in, sharing how Helen had single-handedly saved the neighborhood. There was genuine admiration in his tone. Angela, watching from across the yard, caught Helen's eye and smiled, a warm, grateful, unspoken thank you. Later that evening, as the party wound down, Angela and Helen cleaned up together. "Mom, I didn't realize how much we needed you, not just in a crisis, but all the time. You hold us together." Helen squeezed her daughter's hand. "It's easy to take family for granted, until you remember what you do to keep them safe. I'm just glad you finally listened." Angela grinned. "From now on, I promise, I'll always listen." As dusk settled, Helen lingered in the yard, fireflies flickering around her, Diesel curled up at her feet. She felt something new, peace, mingled with pride. She had not only protected her family, but helped knit a stronger community. Her vigilance, once dismissed as worry, had become a gift. That night, before bed, Helen sat with her old notebook. She opened to a fresh page and wrote, "They once called me a worrier. Now they call me a friend, a mother, a neighbor. Maybe the truth isn't just what we uncover, but what we build together." Summer arrived, bringing long days and a lightness to the air. Helen spent more time than ever with her family, helping Angela with the garden, teaching Emma and Toby to ride their bikes, sharing lemonade on the porch with neighbors who now dropped by just to chat. The neighborhood, once marked by suspicion and anxiety, now felt safe, woven together by trust and shared experience. Angela made good on her promise to include Helen in every part of family life. They planned a weekend camping trip, something Angela had always hesitated to do. With Helen's steady presence, the adventure was a success. S'mores around the fire, whispered stories under the stars, and Emma declaring it the best trip ever. Mike admitted that he'd always felt reassured with Helen along, her calm in a crisis, her watchful eye. Even Diesel, the dog, seemed to relax more, snuggling beside Helen at every opportunity. In the evenings, Helen reflected on how far they'd come. There were still little worries, small noises in the night, a forgotten lock, but these were no longer sources of conflict. Instead, they served as gentle reminders of how important it was to look out for one another, to never dismiss the instincts of someone who loves you. At the next neighborhood gathering, Angela made a toast. "To my mom," she said, raising her glass, "whose care, courage, and stubbornness kept us all safe. We owe more to her overreacting than we'll ever know." The group laughed and clapped, but Helen's eyes sparkled with emotion. She hugged Angela and whispered, "Thank you for trusting me." After the guests left and the children were tucked in, Helen and Angela sat quietly on the porch. Fireflies blinked in the darkness, and a warm breeze carried the scent of jasmine. Angela leaned her head on her mother's shoulder. "I used to think being careful meant being afraid," she admitted. "But now I see it means being strong, for the people you love." Helen smiled, brushing a stray hair from Angela's face. "Sometimes, love sounds like worry. Sometimes, it sounds like, lock the door, or don't forget your keys. But it's always love." That night, as Helen prepared for bed, she added a final line to her notebook. "The truth, once hidden, is now the bond that holds us close. Let them say I overreacted, my family is safe, and that's all that matters." She switched off her lamp, the shadows in her room no longer frightening. Outside, the world was at peace, and Helen, once the worrier, now the quiet hero of her family, finally slept soundly.